Well, I know we're about a minute early, but I want to start right on time. My name is Mike Staton. I work with Michigan State University Extension as a soybean educator. And I want to welcome you to the Field Crops Virtual Breakfast. Today's session is kind of unique in that we have a number of specialists that have joined us, and we don't have any set topic. This is hot topics. This is up to the audience to really ask your questions, and we'd like to use the chat for that is what we would like to do. So please enter your questions into the chat. I will be looking at those and reading those to the specialists, and the specialists will also have access to those as you're typing them in. This is a visual representation of the specialists. They're not all able to join us today because there's some conflicting programs that are going on, and educational programs, and specialist time is being pulled, or specialist time is being pulled many different directions. But we will get as many of your questions answered as we possibly can. So again, please type them into the chat, and I see many of you have done that already. So we'll go ahead and fire off some of our first questions here.
Mike, just a reference. If participants really would like to ask their question live, they can do that. So that's something to, they can unmute themselves, but please keep themselves muted unless asking a question live, and raise your hand.
Thank you, Phil. I like that. That's another really good option. Chris Devanzo puts a message in there, and she's asking for maybe this is a good time to have a Tarspot update. So Marty, have you joined us?
Yep, I'm here, Mike.
All right. Would you be able to give us just a brief Tarspot update?
Sure. Can you enable screen sharing when you guys get a chance? So in general, Tarspot is super light this year. So, I mean, it's been the case all across, the entire season, really. The wheat crop was really clean in terms of foliar diseases. Most foliar diseases in soybean, there's not that many of them either. We just haven't had moisture or prolonged moisture events for the most part. And so that's why, we're not seeing a great deal of Tarspot. Go ahead and just share my screen then and just show you where we found Tarspot. So here's where we found or had confirmations of Tarspot in Michigan this season. I have no doubt that it's present in other counties. It's just that this is where, people have been looking and have reported it back to us. So if you do see it in another county that's not lit up, please get in touch with me. Send me a photo if you can, just to help confirm that. But basically, a lot of these counties that have been confirmed have only been confirmed recently, and you can hover over this and have a look at the dates there. So, as compared to last year, of course, we had a lot of leaf wetness events, a lot of rainfall events during the season. And so that really, obviously, flared a lot of foliar diseases, and in particular, Tarspot, people were obviously very concerned about. So, yeah, we're about a month or 6 weeks behind last year in terms of disease development. And I mean, the way the season has progressed, there's not that inoculum there to really fire things up at the end of the season. It can still come, but it's not going to be anywhere near as damaging as last year.
Marty, I looked at the information from the specialists in your website that you have a lot of information on, and they said that there was about a 6% loss in the corn last year due to Tarspot. If we have really light Tarspot this year, what kind of percentages might we see on the loss in corn? Yeah,
I mean, there's always going to be, the potential for some losses. So that 6%, that was nationally. So, if you're one of the local people, that was, a lot bigger than 6% potentially. So there's always going to be some, but then we get into the discussion of, well, should we spray or should we not spray? When we have, in terms of making fungicide applications and trying to get that return on investment, it's going to be far more likely to happen when there's actually disease there to treat. And at the moment, there really just hasn't been that much disease there to treat. So yes, there may still be some losses, but will you recoup that with the fungicide application? Potentially not. So.
Good. Any other questions for Marty on Tarspot? All right. We do have a question in here. It looks like this might be for Brooke or one of the cover crop folks. It's any suggestions for termination of summer cover crops, buckwheat, sorghum, but also having lamb's quarter in the same field. So I think it's like a three-way: lamb's quarter, buckwheat, and sorghum, and trying to control these without cultivation and without herbicides, I think, is the question. Would cultipacking work?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that.
All right.
I don't think cultipacking would do much. You would probably end up just rolling all those plants down, but they would mostly grow back up. The buckwheat may not respond as well as the others. What comes to mind as one thought is potentially mowing really short. Depending on how big the lamb's quarter is, you may get some pretty good control, but it may try to regrow some depending on the weather following and so forth. But the sorghum will try to, if it's sorghum sedan, it will try to regrow if you mow it this time of the year, but then it will winter kill, and the buckwheat will winter kill as well. So you may be able to control at least seed set on lamb's quarter by mowing it that short. But other than that, you know, the only control options really to keep that lamb's quarter from going to seed would be to spray it or to till it before it gets to that point.
Okay, thank you. There was a question about, is Tarspot only on corn? And Marty did answer it in the chat, but would you please answer it live, Marty?
Sure. Yep. To date, we've only ever confirmed that Tarspot pathogen on corn. We have, yeah, so there are other Phyllochora species that infect other grass species, but like there's one that will infect some POA species, but anyway, POA grass species. But yeah, to date, we've only seen Tarspot on corn. If you think you're seeing something different, please let us know. We'd like to check that out. But I think if it was, you know, likely to do damage on wheat or other grasses, we'd know by now.
Okay.
Marty, I've heard some comments that many of the seed companies are ramping up their research programs to try and identify hybrids that are less susceptible to tar spot. And how successful will they be? And what do you expect as far as these hybrids, if they are able to isolate the genes for tar spot resistance, or will they be able to isolate genes for tar spot resistance?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. A lot of the companies have certainly been working pretty hard on this. And we've been facilitating some of that as well. So the problem is, this is a difficult disease to breed for. It's not like one gene has been found that confers resistance to the disease. What we do have at the moment are what we perhaps call QTL, or maybe we have some genes identified, but they only contribute a small amount, like 5% resistance to disease. I think one of the big things that has happened certainly is that some of those really susceptible lines have been identified and removed from production, removed from the lineup. But breeding takes time, right? It takes something like 6 years or something to bring a brand new hybrid through. So it's going to take time, and it's a difficult disease like white mold or SDS to breed for, because it's not just like a single gene that we can put in at the moment to limit disease. And that's some work we're doing in the lab as well, trying to look at some of the molecular interactions here and see if there are specific targets we can go after.
Good, good. I do have another question here for Brooke. It's, I grew wheat and I haven't planted any cover crops yet. Is it too late to plant something? If not, what can I plant in early September?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think everybody gets busy, you know, with all of our crop activities. We get our wheat off, potentially get straw off, and then we're kind of ready. Honestly, we're kind of ready for a break, and then it's okay. We got a little time, and now we're ready. Can I still plant some cover crops? Is it worth it? So the answer would be yes, there's plenty of time right now to get cover crops in, but it's really like every day matters at this point, especially when we're trying to choose what we put in and expecting different options. So we're still before September 1st, and leaves us with quite a few options. So I wouldn't put in any of the summer annual cover crops at this point, like the ones that really love heat. Sorghum Sudan would be one that I wouldn't put in any point at this point anymore. But many of the cooler season crops, even those that winter kill, like oats and radish, are still a viable option. Those radishes will still give you quite a bit of growth if you put them out there, and that oats and radish cover crop will winter kill. Most of your volunteer wheat is also still probably already emerged, and so you'll be able to kill most of that if you do tillage or a herbicide pass in conjunction with planting the cover crop. And if you also want to look at something like red clover or hairy vetch or crimson clover or a legume of sorts, it's still you still have time to get those in and expect reasonable establishment and then growth and nitrogen fixation prior to next year's crop. So yes, you still have quite a few options, but if you get to September 15th, that's kind of when we hit a cutoff point for a lot of these where it's really not worth it and you're really limited to the cereal grains after that point if you want to get much growth.
I'd just like to add to that it also depends on where you are in the state. So, I mean, Brooke is giving you a calendar that works for Southern Michigan, but if the person that posted the question happens to be in the UP, obviously your dates are going to be quite different, and you're probably a little late to do anything there at this point already.
Yeah, thank you, Cam.
Good input. We got another question here. It's a few weeks ago, Phil Cates and Kim Cassida suggested that later planting of alfalfa was an acceptable risk. Do these findings suggest that it is safe to harvest alfalfa a little later in the fall and still get sufficient regrowth?
Yes, I can address that. In fact, when it cycled around to be my turn, if I had anything to update, that was going to be what I talked about. So excellent question. Yes, basically what we talked about with the planting dates is that, because our season is shifting a little bit, so our killing frosts are coming later in the fall. Yes, absolutely, that is also going to affect the timing of that window that we try and avoid cutting our alfalfa in. And so that window in the fall is we try and avoid cutting 6 weeks before the killing frost, because we want to give the alfalfa enough time to recover after that last late summer cutting, and renew its root reserves before we take our last cutting off. You can come in after a killing frost and take a cutting. It won't affect your ability of the alfalfa to get through the winter, as long as you leave enough stubble behind so that it can catch snow. But we do think that that's pushing our no harvest window later in the fall. So you can use the same calendar or the same map that I put up in that establishment talk showing the current dates of 50% chance of a killing frost, and you can use that for your location to estimate when 6 weeks before that date is, where you would not want to cut your alfalfa in that window.
Very good. Very good.
And Mike, I'm sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to follow up on Kim's comment regarding the climatology that she told us what's happening out there. It's on average, and this is again relative to what we know from the past, but it has come as much as a calendar week later on average. It doesn't mean that every year is a little different, but on average, right, that first killing freeze is typically a week later now than it was just a couple decades ago. And the other not so good part about that is that it's virtually impossible to predict when that killing freeze may occur more than maybe a week or so out. It's a really difficult thing to do, but using the statistics is still the best bet, but it definitely is later now than it was in the past. Yeah. And we're absolutely always dealing with an average when we give you these dates. So a little bit of it depends on how willing you are to pick up more risk or less risk. It never will hurt your alfalfa to not
cut it in the fall. But if you need that last little bit of forage, we just try and avoid that 6 weeks before frost window. Or just wait until after frost and get it.
Sounds good. Does the potash fertility in the soil, does that impact winter survival? And is that something they should consider? Have they been?
Absolutely, yes. And actually fall is a good time to apply potash on alfalfa because potash is a very important nutrient for winter survival. So if your soil is lacking, you definitely want to get that boosted before your alfalfa gets into the winter.
Very good. We got a question for Dennis or for Manny. It's a wheat question. It's any new data or research for winter wheat and best fall seeding rates if we can get in early this fall. I think they're looking for early planting. What would be our best management practices? And then any other nutrient recommendations for wheat, such as sulfur in the starter.
I can take the seeding rate component, maybe, Mike. So we have been doing work on optimal seeding rates across different wheat planting times. I think we have done it over 3 years now. So we are still crunching the numbers, but what we are finding out is that there is a potential to cut down on our seeding rates, especially with the early plantings. I believe we went from 0.8, so 0.8 million all the way up to 2.4 million seeds per acre. And again, we recommend going with the number of seeds rather than pounds of seed, right, in terms of seeding rate. I believe, again, I don't have the final numbers now, but I think it's going to be, at least for the early planting, it's going to be around 1.2 million range. So if you can take even more risk, you can go a little bit lower than that, but I feel like we will find that it's around 1 to 1.2 million seeds per acre. Because again, I think it gives you more uniform tillering, you have more spacing between seeds, and it helps with the overall management. It probably even helps with any lodging concerns that might occur if you plant early and put too many seeds out there, right? With the delayed in planting, I think what we are finding out is that after mid-October or so is when we need to start bumping those seeding rates up. Not as much as we used to think. I think it's lower, like we used to say, like go up to even 2 million seeds per acre. I believe it's lower than that. Again, I don't have the final data, but I think it's probably around at 1.8 million per acre if it's towards end of October going into November. Timeline. Pushing it much higher does not benefit, is what we are seeing at this point. So that's the seeding rate part. Yeah, I haven't done the fertility. I think Dennis or Kurt might have answer to that.
Mike, I'm going to ask Manny, is that a sliding time scale as far as going from 1.2 to 1.8 million? So if you're planting the 1st of October, the 2nd week of October, is there a sliding scale to go from 1.2 to 1.8?
Probably. So again, we have a lot of data, a lot of numbers to crunch here over the next few months. I think if you are before mid-October, you probably don't need to, I think, change it much. What we are finding out is the yield decline with the delay in planting mostly occurs after mid-October timeline. So once you hit that point, you are really like trying to figure out how to minimize the loss in yield potential, right? But at least for now, I kind of like what you're talking about, Phil. It probably is. I mean, to make it easy, one can use a sliding scale. The earlier you are, the lower you want to be, because you're getting more tellers, right? So probably starting with that around 1 million to 1.2 million, end of September, early October, maybe bumping it up a little bit, with that mid-October. But really after mid-October is when you want to really push it. And it also depends on like what you have done before, right? Just like corn and soybean, I would recommend, people, at least, if you are at a higher rate, try to put 20% lower strips out there and see what happens, right? Because again, yield limiting factors are specific to field, and canopy development is what we are trying to achieve, right? Like maximizing light interception and getting enough tellers in the fall that are going to give us productive heads at the end of the season.
and I know we're running short on time here, but the only thing I would add is if you are more interested in learning how to push your yields higher, I would strongly suggest you consider signing up for the Great Lakes Yield Enhancement Network. That's a project that we're partnering with Ontario, and we've got growers from the region, not just Michigan and Ontario, but we've got New York, Ohio, Kentucky, Wisconsin growers as well. And we are sharing the agronomy data of what are we doing to grow this crop. And so these guys that are pushing 120, 140, 150 bushel yield, what are they doing? Are they putting on this fall fertilizer? What is the makeup of it? Is sulfur a key component? If you want to learn more, sign up for the Great Lakes Yield Enhancement Network project. And if you want to know more about it, contact me, and I can help get you set up to do that. But yeah, we're looking at all of those different components, the questions that you were asking, Rebecca. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
One last comment I will add is we have done some work on planting methods. I think we will put an article here in another week or so. We are seeing benefit of going with narrow rows or going with like some sort of precision technology. So again, there is more information that will be coming out here that you can potentially use.
Good. Thank you, Manny and Dennis. Brooke, this is for you. It's a follow-up on the termination of the summer cover crop question. So basically, the question is wondering if planting cereal rye cover crop into that terminated summer cover crop field, would broadcasting work or is drilling required? And then they want to know, do you do this before or after mowing?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Rye is a cover crop that we can get established by broadcasting, although it's not always perfect. For example, we do broadcast it into standing corn in September sometimes, or around Labor Day, and sometimes get success if we have moisture after seeding it, but it's not entirely reliable. So it's better if you can drill it and get more reliable establishment. Although if broadcasting in that scenario is the only option, I would recommend probably broadcasting it and then trying to mow to cover it up a little bit with some residue. But it's gonna be a questionable practice regardless when you're broadcasting it. And you shouldn't expect great things, but you should expect also that there's a possibility of getting a decent establishment as well.
Good. Thank you very much, Brooke. There's a question from Charles. It's how long does it take to deplete the seed bank for giant ragweed? I've used pre, post, residual, and multiple passes spot spraying and conventional tillage. I see Aaron put a post in there and also answered this online, but Aaron, if you could maybe answer this live.
I just put a link to our website, which has information on a number of weeds, but giant ragweed seed isn't very persistent. So it can be depleted in 2-3 years, but the seed is quite large. So it can emerge from pretty deep depths up to 6 inches and also produce a lot of seeds. So if you have one or two escapes that year, those seeds go into the seed bank and the clock kind of restarts. So, and it also has the ability to germinate throughout the season. Usually we think about it as one of our earlier weeds to emerge in the spring, but there's some shifts in population that can emerge later. So that leads to problems kind of outlasting your herbicide-based tactics. And I know Christy was part of that research, so she could probably ping on too if I forgot anything.
Aaron, I think you covered it again. Even though we do deplete that seed bank, around 99%, there is still that 1%, and 1% can be a lot of seeds.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Christy, while I've got you, I have a question, and I work with soybeans, of course. But I hear there's a lot of desiccants, a lot of harvest aids used in dry bean production. Can they be effective in soybean production? Is there a place for those in soybean production?
I think for the pre-harvest application in soybeans, I think the best place for them is just to try to help dry down some of those weeds, not really looking at them to increase, kind of that desiccation. Really, that's what we're looking for dry beans, kind of help even that out. I think the best place for it is just really from the weed control standpoint, And there are about 4 or 5 different products that are labeled, and we have all that information in the weed guide about when to apply it, which ones are the most effective for some of those weed species. Probably one thing I do want to mention also is just driving around, we're really starting to see a lot of water hemp show up in several soybean fields that are above, or even sugar beets, and maybe even in some dry beans. But just the last couple days, just driving some back roads, water hemp's popping up everywhere. So be a good time to scout your fields, make notes. If you're interested in knowing what that resistance screen is, or the resistance profile of that water hemp species, Aaron Hill with Diagnostic Services and the Michigan Soybean Committee have been doing a lot of screening over the years, and I think you can probably turn those in and get those screened. And usually what Erin does, she'll look for glyphosate resistance, ALS resistance, and then the one thing that we're probably more concerned about is some of the resistance to some of the PPO inhibitors, particularly when we start thinking about either going to non-GMO soybeans or in dry beans, where we really rely heavily on those. So just a couple of things there. One other thing, I think Phil made a comment in the chat, wondered if I could comment on mare's tail control after wheat harvest. Actually, in fact, we just did a evaluation yesterday on some of our different treatments, and we're really at this stage in the game really kind of trying to shy away from using either dicamba or 2,4-D because they're just really not that effective on some of that taller mare's tail, plus with the dicamba the potential for off-target movement. But we're having really good luck with either Liberty or Sharpen for control of mare's tail in that wheat stubble. And just kind of thinking about what your rotations are. Remember, if you're going to dry beans or sugar beets, you might want to stay away from that 2-ounce rate of Sharpen, but the 1-ounce rate is looking pretty good. And with both of those, they're probably not going to control any volunteer wheat. So if you're trying to get rid of that too, you're probably going to want to taint mix that with some glyphosate.
Good. Thank you, Christy. I like what Christy did. She not only answered the question, but she also shared information that she thought was timely and relevant. So thank you, Christy. So I want to give other specialists a chance to do that same thing. If there's something, because we don't have any more questions in the chat right now, but if there's other topics that you feel our audience really should know about, this is an excellent time to do that.
Can I say something, Mike?
Yes, Marisol, please.
Just quickly, want to say,
Marcel.
What did you say? Okay. Just quickly want to say that fall, like this time, is perfect time to take samples for soybean cyst nematode and other if you grow sugar beet cyst nematode. Of course, soybean is good to get samples with soybean cyst nematode. It's included with the Michigan, the checkoff dollars covered by the Michigan Soybean Promotion Committee and Michigan Soybean Committee, now new name. And you can submit it to the MSU Plant Diagnostic Lab. And that's it.
Thank you, Marisol. Very timely update. I was just in a field yesterday. It had some sudden death syndrome in it. We pulled up the roots. We didn't even dig them up, Marisol. We just pulled them out of the ground and found cysts on the roots. So, yep.
Yeah. Well, soybean cyst nematode is very common. It's like in almost every county that grows soybeans in Michigan. And it is extremely damaging. It's the #1 yield robbing pathogen in North America. Oh, by the way, the MSU Plant Diagnostic Lab, the nematologist now is Angie, and Angie is doing a good job. She has already been counting nematodes, identifying nematodes, so everything remains the same, even though Fred has retired. All the functions, you can submit your soils just the same. All right.
Very good. Thank you, Marisol. Is there anyone else that any of our other specialists that have some hot topics that you want to share with our audience?
Mike, I have just a quick question.
Yes.
So as a follow-up for Christy on the mare's tail control, what about stinger? Would that be effective, and what rotation restrictions should we be aware of if stinger is considered for mare's tail control?
So Brooke, one of the things with Stinger probably at this stage, that mare's tail is probably too big to really be effectively controlled with Stinger. I mean, it'd be very similar to 240 and dicamba. They're just kind of twisting the tops. I think the highest rated is about 50% control. The other thing is with Stinger, we do have a lot longer rotation restrictions, pretty much to most of the broadleaf, whether it's a cover crop or, you know, if we applied Stinger now, we would definitely have some issues with things like soybeans and dry beans the following year.
Thanks.
There is a question, kind of a sugar beet question, Daniel. I don't know if you're still on, but it's what's the expectation for the sugar beet crop this year?
Yeah, so I think it's overall a fairly positive expectation for it. We're starting on Monday already, so that's a little bit earlier than what we were maybe thinking earlier in the season. I think, you know, we caught some of these rains here in the last couple of weeks, so I think that's certainly helped the crop. So, and because it was drier earlier, we're seeing lower disease levels than what we have in the past too. So that's a positive thing as well.
Good, good. There was one other thing I wanted to mention. It's in the chat, but Dennis Pennington had to log off, but he was talking about his high yield program, and he did leave a link to that in the chat. The Great Lakes Yield Enhancement Network. So Dennis did provide a link in the chat. So those of you that want to participate in that, please click on the link. There are no further questions that I can see. Well,
Mike, I think Brian sent a question to me.
Okay.
And it was on strip till, whether we should do fall or spring using a shank or a coulter.
Oh boy. I can take a stab at that. We did some strip tillage trial in soybeans, and we compared no-till to two different timings. The tool that we used was, and we were in 30-inch rows, the tool that we used was the Dawn Pluribus. So that was not a shank. It was a wavy coulter. And the way I describe it is like a compound miter box. The coulter was twisted in two different dimensions to do its tillage work, but a large wavy coulter, and it really left a really nice seed bed and did a really nice job. This is in a coarse textured soil down in Southwest Michigan, the Niles area, and we did show about a 3 bushel advantage over the no-till by running the tool. We did run it in the fall and the spring, and I am trying to think they both beat the no-till, but I believe they were not statistically significantly different from one another. You know, there might have been like a half bushel difference or maybe a bushel difference, but it was not statistically significant in soybeans. So in those coarse textured soils, I don't think it really matters when you build them. The only other experience I have with this is there was a person up in Midland, and I wish I knew the person's name, but they were the best looking 30-inch rows soybeans I've ever seen. Paul Gross introduced me to him, and he actually used like a zone builder with a shank in the fall. And then he was very careful to refresh those strips in the spring, actually use that language, refresh them. So he had two different tools. One was the strip tillage tool he used in the fall, and then he refreshed them in the spring with a separate tool. So kind of a combination of both. And they were by far the best 30-inch row soybeans I've ever seen. And what sticks out of my mind about that is it was back when Isabella had those terrible floods. Manny, you and I visited this field. I don't know if that made an impression on you or not, but Manny and I and Paul visited these flood damaged fields in Isabella and parts of Midland. And here was this field that just long-term strip tillage field just not only took the water, but had I still say that, the best looking 30-inch row soybeans I've ever seen. Anyone else? Manny, do you want to comment on strip tillage, timing, and shank versus coulter? The only thing, before I leave that subject, shank, I think you want to be careful and make sure you have an adjustable shank, one that you can adjust the depth of that if you're running it into marginal moisture conditions. You don't want to be smearing any deeper than you need to. So I think adjustable depth control on a rigid shank would be a desirable feature.
Mike, there was a question from Sierra on soil samples.
Okay. So any soil samples or other, yes. So any soil samples or other nematode samples can just be sent to the MSU plant and pest lab moving forward. Not quite, Sierra. We've got some recent news. So we have two different labs. We have our plant diagnostic lab, which I think Marisol was talking about. So plant samples, yes, those can definitely go forward and be continued to send to the plant and pest diagnostic lab. We just received some news yesterday that
Mike, that would include nematode samples.
Yes, nematode samples go there for sure. But soil samples, the part of that question I guess I want to move to next. We received some news, university-wide news, that the MSU soil testing lab, our soil testing lab, is going to be closing at the end of the calendar year. They will accept soil samples through November, but they will be actually closing and then. It's not going to affect our soil fertility recommendations, our ability to do research and to develop recommendations that will help producers be profitable in the future. It's just, I think it was a question of economics. We weren't getting enough samples in to justify the expense. And in a way, it's kind of competing with the private sector. So I think that those are some of the parts of the decision that was made, but it will not affect how we go forward. If you, like, for example, you test with a private lab, and I don't care who it is, but one of the private labs, and you want an MSU fertility recommendation, your local educator can do that. I work with soybeans. If you want a soybean fertility recommendation based on MSU's recommendations for any private soil test, we have the ability of doing that. So just keep that in mind.
Mike, I just want to make a clarification just in case it's misunderstood. The soil samples does not include nematode samples, so the plant diagnostic lab still manages the nematode sample. So I think when they mean that closing the soil lab, it just means like for fertility from soil nutrients, right, Mike? Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct. They're two different labs. Okay. They're two different labs. So if you have nematode soil samples or disease soil samples, something like that, then yes, that laboratory still remains open. But it's for the nutrient analysis. That's the lab that's going to be closing.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for the clarification, Marisol. Here's a good question. Any economic guidance on the likely cost of fertilizer between fall and spring? Should we expect lower or higher in the fall or the spring? Kurt, would you be able to field that?
Unfortunately, Kurt is not on, Mike.
Is not on. Okay, thank you, Phil. I wrote an article recently for the Michigan Soybean News magazine. So it'll be coming out 1st of September, and it only deals with one nutrient, potash. And it does go into that decision. Do you apply it in the fall or do you apply it in the spring? So look for that in your Michigan Soybean News magazine. I'll probably put it up as a Michigan MSU extension news article too, but I can't do that until after it comes out in the mailboxes. So, but look for that. It does only deal with potash on soybeans, but so look for that article. Any last burning issues that the specialists have at this time? If not, it's 8 o'clock, and I think we should probably wrap up in respect for everybody's time. I really appreciate you joining us this morning and appreciate all the specialists. Excellent job of answering questions and sharing what you think was timely. And again, thanks for Jeff's weather update. We'll see you next week.